Is the justice system in Canada getting better or worse? I can't speak for the countries that I'm not familiar with, other countries of the world, but I've been a lawyer for 38 years, and in my opinion, it's getting worse. Much worse. I have actually seen the growth of government and the shrinking of individual freedom and individual rights and power. And by that I mean I have seen cases where, for instance, the medical profession, which is in British Columbia very well protected and well insured and has very capable and well-funded lawyers, defeat claims of people who were misdiagnosed with lung cancer when in fact other doctors had seen the tumor well before the doctor who identified it as being non-existent, and the person died. Well, what is the situation? The lawyers for the medical profession are very well trained, very well funded, and money wins. The individual loses. I've seen the Ministry of Family and Children's, or Children and Families, or whatever they call themselves today, the welfare department in effect, take away children from parents, good parents, and return them to alcoholic parents, who then lose them, and not turn them back to the parent who is not an alcoholic, but put it in a foster home. I've seen this happen. I've seen many other instances of the state interference in the private life of individuals, where the sort of social worker mentality intrudes in such a way that it's impossible to restore children to their parents. Parents' rights are being diminished every day. I see freedom being diminished, both in the so-called hate crimes laws and in the human rights legislation that does not allow truth as a defense. I've seen these things happen in such a way that the power of the state, which is after all the biggest corporation, always wins. They after all appoint the judges, don't they? And who are the judges? Well, they're people that are actually very well connected, and they generally are in favor of the system as it is. And the system as it is grows more and more powerful every day. The government has funds to prosecute people, and even if they're acquitted, they never get their money back. They have to pay for their own defense. And legal aid? Well, it pays very, very little. And the lawyers who act for legal aid, some of them are idealistic, and some of them are basically there because they wouldn't get paid elsewhere. And sometimes that happens. The result of which is there's no funding for the defense. And if you're unfortunate enough to be middle class, where you have to pay your own way and you don't get legal aid, and you might be acquitted, you lose anyway because you can't afford it. And you've lost the money, and the state doesn't give it back even if the state is wrong. I've seen cases where those who protested against abortion are made criminal for simply expressing their opinions in certain places. Or maybe, and get this, even advertising the existence of the bubble zones becomes a crime in that bubble zone. So you hand out literature that actually contains the legislation and nothing more. No comment about abortion. The legislation being that you're not allowed to protest within an abortion zone. So you hand out the literature that says you can't protest in an abortion zone. George Orwell couldn't have done it any better. By advertising the legislation itself, you're breaking the legislation. I've seen this happen. I have seen special interest groups make laws that oppress and terrorize, in effect, those they disagree with. And these things are all possible because, unfortunately, lawyers have become too preoccupied with money and not principle. And I don't blame them. I guess in a way everybody wants to live, and we have to provide for our families, and we have to feed our families and look after ourselves. But beyond that, our calling as lawyers should be to a higher principle, that of justice, at whatever the cost. In terms of political cost, I know what it means to pay the political price for standing up for free speech, for instance. I know what it means to pay the price for representing people who can't get lawyers. And I think it's more and more obvious that if lawyers don't do this, they will not develop respect in society because they're just in it for the money. And if people see it that way, justice is for sale, and that becomes corrupt. And I suggest that more and more lawyers should take a serious look at the interests of the profession as a whole and their own personal integrity, and dedicate more and more time to fighting for justice, even when it's unpopular, even when it's not going to get them any money. because ultimately the government's taxing it all away anyway. And I watch the tax department become oppressive, take away freedom and rights, and run roughshod over people, because of course they're the sort of the mouth end of the government. They are the suction vacuum to take all the money out of the pockets of the citizen and put it in the hands of the bureaucrats so that they will acquire more power, and it's all about power. Politicians cannot be trusted to defend liberty because they're in the pocket of special interest groups too often, and where is there going to be any defense for liberty? The tax department rides over people roughshod. The social services department, wherever it is and whatever it calls itself, frequently does the same. When freedom is not fought for by people of integrity, it disappears. And if anyone is going to do it, it seems to me it's lawyers who place principle above politics, above power, and above money itself. And I encourage more lawyers to do just that. And it looks to me like the way the legal system works, the way the judicial system works, the centralization of power in Ottawa, the Supreme Court, and its appointment process has become totally oppressive. And if we want freedom, liberty, and the ideals of the individual, we're going to have to free the West and start all over again with a new legal and judicial system.